Welcome, Gunrunner.
Recently on this channel I concluded my greatest arcade game series with a video that listed the top 20 titles as voted for by you, the retro gaming community. It saw hundreds of people voting, over 100 different games voted for, and it proved extremely popular with my viewers too. I did plan to leave the series there, but in the comments for that video lots of people said they would like to see me count down my own top 20. And being somebody who always tries to give my audience what they want, here we are. So before I start counting down my own personal choices, I thought I'd give you a bit of background into how I selected these particular games. Firstly, all of these coin-ops are ones that I played in the real world back in the day, so no modern discoveries from my main library or games that I recently enjoyed at expos. Only those arcade titles that trigger nostalgic memories. This made it a lot easier for me to make my selections. I also wanted to tell you my own arcade journey, which started about age 7 when my mum set up a dancing school in the local youth club, the Hoy, in my hometown of Harpenden, Hertfordshire, which had a small arcade of its own in the corner. This is when I really started noticing them, as subsequent holidays at different Butlins camps around the seaside towns of England saw my exposure to arcade games grow even more. The fun fair would also come to town around 5 or 6 times from spring through to autumn, and this would always have several big arcade trailers as part of it, always with the very latest games. As I grew older and started setting out on my own, I also found arcades I could visit in bigger towns and cities nearby like Luton and St Albans too. Despite owning numerous home consoles and computers, my love for the authentic arcade experience never wavered, and these dimly lit smoke-filled halls will always hold my happiest and most nostalgic memories. So with all that in mind, let's see what games I picked then, shall we? Now there's a very specific reason I'm starting with this game, and that's because Asteroids was the very first arcade game I ever played. It was positioned right by the entrance to the aforementioned youth club, and I was enthralled by those glowing vectors for the first moment I saw them. I specifically remember having to stand on a Coca-Cola crate to reach the controls, and lasted no more than a minute or so, but it certainly made me want to play a lot more. I'm still not very good at Asteroids, and it's far from one of my favourite games ever, but that early memory is so important to me personally. Again, like Asteroids, Pac-Man is another game that I've never been particularly good at, and again it's also another game that I wouldn't go out my way to play. I prefer almost all the sequels, especially Pac-Mania, but it's the memories of this game that secure its place on this list. Going on holiday to Butlins as a kid, there were Pac-Man arcade machines everywhere, far more than any other game. The seemingly simple gameplay, cute characters and distinctive sounds just drew you in like nothing else from the time, and the first game I think of when I remember those holidays is Pac-Man. The one and only time I got to play this game was on a visit to the Trocadero in London, and their amazing Sega World Arcade there. I remember most wanting to play the G-Log R360 when I got there, but the queues for it were insane, and at £2 a play I was really put off. But it turned out that Power Drift was the much better game, and the hydraulic cabinet that housed it was every bit as exciting too. I loved the game so much I purchased conversions of both the ZX Spectrum and Atari ST, but neither of them came close to replicating the magic of the full arcade experience. Alongside Pac-Man, another one of those early arcade games that I have vivid memories of from my holidays is Centipede. It had much the same kind of aesthetic appeal, and that cabinet side art still remains my favourite ever. So much so in fact that I had a custom phone cover made for it with it on recently. I also loved the novelty of having a trackball instead of a joystick, and my passion for the game only increased further as I received it as the pack-in title with my Atari 2600 Junior. Centipede isn't just one of my favourite coin-ops ever, it's one of my favourite video games ever. Taito's amazing Euro Champ 92 arrived in arcades just about the same time I really got into football. The scaling and zooming graphics that I saw in the attract mode all convinced me to drop a few 10p's into the slot. Fast action gameplay more than lived up to the promise, and the crazy commentary also helped up the excitement levels too. I will never forget the first time I pulled off the super shot sending the opposition goalkeeper through the back of the net, and the ongoing eagerness to recreate it. This still remains my favourite arcade orientated footy game ever. One genre I never really took much notice of in the arcades back in the day was scrolling shoot 'em ups. It might have been because I found them too hard, or just because I didn't find them that interesting, but that's all changed with Raiden. In 1993 we went on a family holiday to Falmouth, Cornwall, and just down the road from our hotel was a smallish arcade, and along the back wall next to Super Space Invaders and Laser Ghost was Raiden. I already played most of the others, so gave it a try and soon became hooked. The arrival of the amazing Atari Jaguar port helped continue that love affair. A lot of my earliest arcade memories are watching my dad play games, because I was simply too small and not really old enough to play them myself. But once I hit my teenage years, there were a select few games that we could play together, and Choice HQ was one of them. My dad would play this whenever he saw it, proclaiming it as his favourite game, and after watching him play I would always want to stick a coin in myself to try and do better. Again, this is another game that stuck with me on home systems too, with the excellent ZX Spectrum version in this particular case. I still remember the opening of the Hatfield Galleria, a new type of shopping centre that focused on discount and outlet shops. It was the first of its type in our local area. My mum was eager to visit, I however was not, as I hated shopping. However, the moment I noticed it had a small arcade in the food hall, all was forgiven. The one machine that stood out was a fully hydraulic sit-down Galaxy Force 2. I had to beg for the money to play it and never experienced anything like it at the time. While I greatly enjoyed playing the game again on my Atari ST, nothing could truly replicate the original. From one Sega Superscaler game to another, as I now turn my focus to Outrunners. I can't exactly remember the first place I played this second arcade sequel to Outrun, although I think it might have been at Billing Aquadrome. Having loved the original, I was immediately drawn to this highly authentic follow-up. New features such as different cars, rendered visuals and the new music tracks took an already perfect formula and brought it right up to date. This is also a game that never made it over to home systems successfully either, so it's still best played in its original arcade form. As we hit the top half of this list, we'll encounter more and more games that cannot be truly replicated outside of the arcade. In essence, this was just a first-person 3D space shooter, not really that much divorced from earlier examples such as Atari's Star Wars, which was reportedly an inspiration for Starblade. But what made it special was the fully immersive cabinet that used special mirrors to project the gameplay environment around you. This brought a whole new dimension to the otherwise fairly rudimentary gameplay that could never be fully replicated in the home. There is a really big part of me that wanted to put this game higher on the list, simply because of my huge nostalgia for the Turtles in general, but in the end I just felt that all the coin-ops that finished above it were better games. But that's not to say the game that defined Konami's much used and much loved scrolling beat-em-up formula that nearly saw me include The Simpsons 2 is a bad game, because it most certainly isn't, and there's no doubt that it perfectly captured the clamour for the heroes in a half shell at this time, and was the hottest game in the scene at that time too. I have to confess something here. I'm not really a huge Star Wars fan. Not now, and never have been. No doubt this will see some of you demanding that my geek card is revoked. But I am a huge fan of Atari's Star Wars arcade game, the cockpit model in particular. Of all the Vector arcade games released, there's no doubt this made the most impact, as it recreated key scenes from the original movie perfectly, and really made you feel part of the whole experience, with its flight yoke controller and digitised speech samples. It certainly wasn't a very long game, but it always made you want to come back for more. The game that finished first in the list that was voted for by you, Double Dragon, was also the title that made me fall in love with scrolling beat-em-ups, which still remains my favourite genre to this day. It was also the first arcade game I ever completed, albeit with the help of my younger brother, at the old Butlins holiday camp in Barry Island. I'll never ever forget the thrill of finishing the game only to turn around and see a huge crowd of kids gathered right behind us, cheering and offering up high fives. None of the sequels or home conversions ever managed to live up to the magic of that arcade original. There are a lot of different Capcom scrolling beat-em-ups that could have made this list, but in the end there was only room for one, and it had to be the arcade exclusive Alien vs Predator. For me, this title is the very pinnacle of Capcom's efforts in this genre, and it remains a game that I play regularly to this day, usually on my Retro Pi. It perfectly captured the already over-the-top subject matter with its extreme levels of violence, potent weaponry, awesome character designs and huge bosses. It's hard to think of many two-player arcade games that are more enjoyable than AVP. I think it's fair to say that there are a lot of entries in my list that wouldn't make most others, but with Sega's iconic arcade driving game Outrun, we have a game that seems to be universally loved. From the first moment I saw a sit-down version of the game at Butlins in Brighton, I fell in love with it. The blue skies, the convertible red Ferrari, the amazing soundtrack, and the stunning scenery that flies past you as you cruise along the different routes. Everything about Outrun is an absolute joy to behold. It was such a shame that all the home ports of the era were so poor though. The first arcade game I remember being truly addicted to was Rampage. Every time the fair came to my town, my younger brother and I would head straight down there just to play it, and wouldn't stop until we ran out of money. On your own, the game was pretty enjoyable, but add one, or even better, two friends, and the game really came into its own, and for me, it remains one of the most fun multiplayer games of all time. The excitement transferred very well into the home too, with a multitude of excellent conversions. It was certainly no surprise to see the game eventually turned into a big box office movie too. I will never forget the first time I saw Gauntlet, or should I say heard it, because it was the sound booming out of the huge speakers that first got my attention. Positioned at the very end of a long thin arcade in Butlins Margate, it took over the whole room, and literally insisted that you play it. On that first play I was joined by two of my siblings and my dad. It seemed incredible that four of us could play a game together like that. We played it so long that my mum was worried what had happened to us. Gauntlet truly was a groundbreaking moment in the world of multiplayer video games. I'm sure this entry is going to surprise 99% of people watching this, and I doubt that Road Riot is even on most people's radar when it comes to compiling such a list. But this is where it's all about personal opinion. Arcade driving games have always been a favourite of mine since the first time I played Pole Position, and for me, Atari's Road Riot 4-wheel drive took things to a whole new level. From the digitised graphics and sound, which included huge dollops of humour, to the custom multiplayer cabinet that jolted you in the back as you played. Everything about this game was absolutely incredible, well, to me anyway. As a huge fan of wrestling back in the early 90s, Technos' Wwf Wrestle Fest was pretty much a dream game. It had all my favourite wrestlers, it had my favourite pay-per-view, the Royal Rumble, as a game option, and the gameplay was easy to learn but difficult to master. In an era where WWF games were commonplace on home consoles, it's absolutely scandalous that WrestleFest never got a home port, and just as scandalous that it never got an updated sequel either. For me, this is still the perfect arcade wrestling game, and I'm not sure it will ever be better. And my number one game is one that seems to come in for a lot of very unjustified hate these days, which I mainly put down to the mostly poor home conversions. I think a lot of people forget just how advanced Pit Fighter was for the time, with its digitised graphics and sound, real actors, motion capture and the scaling and panning effects. I think they also forget just how big it was too. It remains the most successful arcade game released under post-split Atari games and was highly acclaimed by the press of the time too. I know that I was truly blown away the first time I saw Pit Fighter in action, and I became totally obsessed by it. It's still the only arcade game I've ever completed on a single credit, and its place at the top of my list was never under threat. And that rounds up my look at my personal 20 greatest arcade games of all time. Are there any games that you're surprised not to see on the list, or were you shocked at some of the titles that I did include in my top 20? As always, I love to hear your thoughts and views in the comments, so get typing. Before I go though, I must thank all of my loyal patrons to continue to support my channel and make videos like this possible. However, I must give special thanks to the following patrons in particular for their much appreciated pledges: D. Vaughan, Mitchell Valentino, Neptune, Seth A. Robinson, Carl Olsen, Aussie B, Dos Gamerman, Grady Haynes, Paul Daniel, Retro Resolution, Troy Dube, S-Mania999 and Electron Star Collapse. If you also want to help support all my creative endeavours, including this YouTube channel, then please go check out my Patreon right now. You can get access to host extra content, including downloads, exclusive videos, creative insights and much more besides. I've been the Laird, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you all again for another video very soon.